Hello, everyone, and welcome to our lunchtime session during CME Palooza Spring, at least lunchtime here on the East Coast. This session is sponsored by Projects and Knowledge, and it is called Using Patient Voice to Advance Instructional Design, a Case Study. Our moderator for this session is Poonam Kapadia. Poonam is the Vice President of Education Strategy at Projects and Knowledge, powered by Kaplan. And Poonam will introduce the rest of the panelists once we go through some of these introductory slides. For those of you who participate in the CME Palooza Feeds the People, for those 25 folks who won $20 Grubhub gift cards, hopefully you are using them to get your lunch delivered today. So, as we do with all of our sessions, I first want to thank our sponsors, our gold sponsors, Med Learning Group, Medscape Education, Projects in Knowledge, our silver sponsors, Academic CME, DKB Med, Daiichi Sankyo, Global Learning Collaborative, Helio CME, HMP Education, MedLive, and Talem Health, and our bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, Bonum Continuing Education, Catalyst Medical Education, CMEology, Excalibur Medical Education, Global Education Group, Infograph Ed, Integritas Communications, Iridium Continuing Education, MedIQ, Partners for Advancing Clinical Education, Paradigm Medical Communications, PBI, and Vindico Medical Education. So, as with all of our CME Palooza sessions, there are two ways to ask questions during this session. You can use the CME Palooza text line 267-666-0CME0263. Or if you are watching this on YouTube, you can enter in questions with the YouTube chat function. We've had a lot of people using the chat function this morning. It's a great way to kind of communicate, and we can pop some of the questions right up on the screen that way. So we will be incorporating audience response questions during this presentation via Poll Everywhere. So if you do not have the Poll Everywhere app installed on your device, you can install it and join the presentation CME Palooza 005, or you can type the URL that is on your screen right now in your web browser. Please do not use our Google text line to respond to audience response questions. That does not work. So finally, the speaker disclosure. Please note that the opinions, discussions, and/or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, its parent company, or their affiliates. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Poonam to get this session started.
Thanks, Scott. I'm really happy to be here today to moderate this session. So our session is titled Using the Patient Voice to Advance Instructional Design. And I'm joined today by Natalie Goldberg and Swapna Kakani, and we're going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves. But Natalie is my colleague at Projects and Knowledge, powered by Kaplan. I should have probably started with where I am. So I'm at Projects and Knowledge, powered by Kaplan, Vice President of Education Strategy. We're also known as PIK. Natalie is my colleague at PIK, one of our esteemed scientific directors, and we're both thrilled to have Swapna with us today. She is a patient advocate that's worked with us on CME programs. So ladies, I'm going to turn it over to you to say a little bit about yourselves. Natalie, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Goldberg, and as Poonam said, I'm a scientific director at PIK, which means I get to work on instructional design and content development for our CME programs. I have a background in neurobiology with an emphasis on learning and memory, and that's going to come up today in our conversation. And I also have some training in curriculum design. So I'm excited to contribute to this conversation today with Swapna and Poonam.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Poonam. And it's hello, everyone, and good afternoon and good morning to those coming from different time zones. It's a real honor to participate in this session alongside Poonam and Natalie. They have put in a lot of hard work, and together we've arranged a great message and agenda for you. I am Swapna Kakani, as Poonam said, and I am a consultant, researcher, and most importantly, a healthcare advocate for patients living with chronic and rare diseases inspired from my own lived experience, which I will get into later. And we also have a research company that I'll talk about later called the Gutsy Perspective. And that all has incorporated into how we have partnered together with Kaplan for previous projects as well as for today. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, guys. All right, so we're going to start off our session with a couple of ARS questions. I'm going to hand it over to Natalie, but I just want to say to those who are joining in, we're making the assumption that a lot of you have some experience with this topic, incorporating the patient voice into your programs. We hope that this will be a space for discussion and knowledge sharing as well as reflection. So please engage with our ARS questions and in the chat later on today. But Natalie, I'm going to hand it over to you for this in the next question.
Yeah, awesome. I love what we're seeing here. I love that we have a few people who do this all the time and maybe even more experts than Poonam and I are, probably not Swapna, and there are a lot of people who do this some of the time and can probably gain a few new strategies from what we're talking about today. And folks who haven't tried it yet, maybe we can invite an entry point for people to get started doing this. So our next question is for those who have engaged with patients in CME program planning, in what areas are you involving patients in the process?
As results are coming in, I'm interested to see some people are saying that they haven't engaged at all yet, or in the question before, hardly ever. So that's good. I think some of the stuff we're going to share today can help you get started, but also we'll share some real examples too for those who have been doing this for a long time. Natalie, are you surprised by these results, or what's standing out to you from this?
I'm pleased to see that so many people are answering C, that they involve patients as faculty in the educational programs, because we're going to talk today about how important that is to not only have patients represented in the program, but acknowledged as part of the program. We talk a lot to our clinician audiences about validating our patients and empowering them and recognizing their voice. I think it's important that we do that when we involve them in our education as well. So I'm excited to see so many people share that.
Nice.
Ooh, some people have involved in analysis and outcomes interpretation. That's really interesting, because I haven't done that a lot yet. So I would love to hear from those folks in the chat at some point what you're doing in that space. Cool.
I see more than I thought on the dissemination as well, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Same, yeah. Great. All right, so that kind of leads really well and segues into this framework that we wanted to start off with. And really, I'm grateful that Natalie put this visualization together, taken from our conversations with Swapna as we were preparing for this. There was one theme that we talked about a lot, about where the patient really fits in, the patient partner fits into your educational program. And I think they're often thought of as stakeholders or just a piece of that puzzle, like faculty, like medical writers. Okay, this program, we're going to engage a patient partner, and they get added as a stakeholder. But we talked about the value of what if the patient partner was actually at the center of your program, from design through development and through dissemination, because there's really value that they can add in all of those components. So of course they can engage with faculty, and as many of you represented, you're actually having them speak alongside medical clinical faculty as well. But they can also provide very unique perspectives when you're talking about curriculum design, or maybe if you're before you even put a grant in, talking about the instructional design components that can make the program really impactful. I don't know how many folks think of how important it is for patient partners to work with medical writers, and at a baseline to just be able to share the patient journey that you want to be reflected in the program. But for many patient advocates who are really informed patients, especially in the rare disease space, some of them might have experience as medical writers, or they're at least really knowledgeable about what's in the literature, and can point you in the direction of publications you might not be aware of, as Swapna did for us, actually. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about the value of partnering with them when you're looking to expand the message and increase the awareness with larger audiences. And really, if the patient partner is at the center, our thought is that it can really dramatically change the outcome of the program that you're designing. So Swapna, do you want to react to this framework or add anything here?
Yeah, if I can, and you said that very well, Poonam. And so, what I enjoyed about this design that Natalie didn't know that she was doing this when she made it is that it represents two dichotomies that patients with lived experience have in participating in professional education content like CME, because the patients are always straddling this lived experience as well as being a professional. So traditionally in the healthcare system, a patient is really at the bottom of the hierarchy system, and it's usually an object. We can be treated like an object, and so we are now changing. And you've probably seen this communication all over that it's patient centered. Patient is the center of the team, which is how it is represented here. But I also like how the patient is coming in as a stakeholder. So in this framework, that's what we want to emphasize, that the patient straddles both sides as both a fellow stakeholder, fellow faculty member, someone who's sharing professional as well as lived experience wisdom, and is also the center of the program design. And to respect that dichotomy that we're trying to navigate ourselves as well.
Thank you. Thanks for that reaction. And like I said, a lot of our conversations really spurred us to share this framework. If we could go to the next slide, Scott. So just as an introductory starting point, we thought we'd outline a couple of the roles that you could consider using with your patient partners. And when we say patient partners, that could be patient advocate, a care partner, or a caregiver, if that's appropriate for the topic that you're looking to educate on. So we have worked with patient partners in the advisory capacity, as speakers and faculty and writers, as trainers. So we're going to speak a little bit about that later in our case example, working with standardized patient actors alongside patient advocates to create meaningful programming. Also as reviewers of content. And then, as we mentioned, they can be valuable when you're disseminating the program. And a lot of this, and there's a couple of examples for how they could provide expertise in these roles. But one thing we wanted to add here is I don't know how many times providers actually ask the patient partner, what role are you comfortable with? And what's the value add that you feel real motivated to provide here? I think we definitely need to take into consideration, and I think we all try to, the fact that there is expertise that they're willing to share, but they're also living with this disease and they have their own journey, and really taking that into consideration when figuring out how they can participate in a way that they're comfortable in the program. Swapna, I think, is there anything you want to add to that? That was really where our conversation focused.
Yeah, so I think it just really repeating how important it is to ask, what do you want, or how do you see this, and coming to the conversation without preconceived bias or preconceived agenda. And that's really common, as we talked about. If you breathe, you have bias, and we all have very strict and quick timelines, and so we are moving fast. But even asking the question and trying for getting authentic, raw patient caregiver input from the beginning of what are you thinking, with any other context, can be really valuable.
Thanks. So that kind of segues here for us to get to know Swapna a little bit better and her experience, both as a patient advocate and her experience in medical education. But Swapna, just to get started here, I'd love if you can just share how you got started in your journey as a patient advocate.
Yeah, of course. And so for me, it really started from day one of life. I was born with a rare chronic GI disease called short bowel syndrome, and I was born with it due to a defect at birth of the small intestine. I was born with all of my small intestine. And to give you a little context of short bowel syndrome, and this will help you understand my journey, short bowel syndrome has advanced medically only in my lifetime. I'm 35 now, and so only in the last 3 decades, and we have a lot of data to show this, has it advanced medically in medical management. And so most of my life, I was a guinea pig in terms of treatments, decision making. It was a lot of whack-a-mole, I like to say. And now babies born with short bowel syndrome, they have a lot of medical devices, innovations, drug development, all to their uh, in front of them. Whereas I and some of my peers have lived past science, and I continue to chart my own path. I am part of the largest living cohort we have ever seen for short bowel syndrome in their 30s, because we are finally seeing people live. And we're finally asking the question, well, what is it actually like to live with the disease? So when I was born, to not have a small intestine, the immediate treatment is to make sure you still have nutrition going into your body, but it bypasses the GI tract. So when I was born, I immediately had to go 2 hours to the closest children's hospital. Where I was born in Alabama, there was no pediatric surgeon. And we were very grateful and very lucky. I didn't know that at the time, but 2 hours seemed a long way away. But now, as an adult, 2 hours is nothing. To have a children's hospital of that significance and excellence only 2 hours away in our home state of Alabama. And that surgeon, who became my pediatric surgeon, but most importantly, my champion, did my first surgery as a 2-day-old baby to save the intestine, the little intestine I was born with. What I was born with was not anatomically or physiologically adequate, uh, but you save the organs that you have as long as you can. And immediately I lived on nutrition from an IV called TPN and nutrition from a feeding tube. And I've lived like that with those two sources of nutrition my entire life, and have had as much of a normal childhood and life as one can imagine. But normal is just a setting on a dryer. Everyone's normal is different. I've always had to adapt to the life and devices versus the devices and options adapting to me. And we constantly pushed the envelope. My parents, my family became doctors themselves, became as knowledgeable as the clinicians, maybe even more at times. But we were also limited by what we knew. At that time, people weren't living very long because we were dying from liver failure due to the IV nutrition. And so they didn't think past that. They didn't think about what is quality of life. And as I got older, I had a lot of complications with the IV nutrition, infections, with IVs, a foreign device in your body. I've had 25 central line infections, or 26, 25 before the age of 17, 31 central lines. So my case was getting more fragile and more complicated, and my options were becoming more limited. We had more surgery to hopefully one day rely on the intestine I was born with. Again, these are surgeries that were invented in my own lifetime, and unfortunately I had complications because sometimes one too many surgeries is just too many. And I had too many complications, and we didn't have any drug development. And when I was a kid, we didn't have any drug developed for short bowel syndrome. It came out when I was in my early 20s, and I missed the opportunity to have it. So I had to have my intestine removed, the same intestine we fought for my entire life, removed at the age of 22. And then at the age of 24, after not being able to take in anything by mouth and live 24/7 on an IV, and all GI contents were draining out into a bag that I held on my leg. And I went back to college to make sure I could graduate from college. God forbid something were to happen after the next surgery. I made the difficult decision to have a small intestine organ transplant. And that same transplant and method only was invented in my lifetime. And thankfully, I now am here talking to you 10 and a half years after that transplant. And unfortunately, not many people are able to live a long time after the transplant. The statistics are not as good as other organs. It's a complicated transplant. And I've had highs and lows. I would never wish on my worst enemy, but highs I've only dreamed of since I was born. I can eat to my heart's desire without pain before, during, or after eating. I'm off of the IV nutrition. It came with a lot of hardships. And my gut works, and I have a full functioning gut for the first time in my life. Uh, Transplant is not a cure. It can be an exchange of hardships, and it is the last treatment option for all organ failures. And it was this journey of going to adult care and at a young age where I learned how difficult it is to have the patient's voice heard, but how important it is for patient safety as well as my outcomes. And so started speaking out about it and have now over time changed it into a speaking and consulting company and learned how difficult it is to level set the education among all clinicians, meaning not all my clinicians knew all my options on the table because I had a pretty complicated history as well as a rare disease. As you guys know, it is very hard to make sure all clinicians everywhere have all the education available to them for the diseases we need them to know about or the innovations coming out. And I really found that I need to be able to help deliver that education, but inform them from a patient side, the nuances of day in and day out living with a chronic disease. I did not know about, I knew about the first drug developed for our disease after my intestine was taken out because the surgeons that I went to all across the country were not aware, and they're not in the field or subspecialty that would be aware. And then we, as a team, other parents who have children born with short bowel syndrome, we found each other online during COVID, and we developed the Gutsy Perspective, which is a community-driven research initiative to study well-being in our population from our voice, to expand the narrative, not change, but really expand and reintroduce a multidimensional narrative, because we finally can ask the question, what is it like to live with this disease, with the disease, not having absence of disease? And so we have now created and the first ever disease-specific pediatric quality of life tool driven by the community, and launched it and analyzing data. And we have 4 articles out that are all open access. So trying to see where to segue. I may need another question, but
Yeah, well, first I want to say thank you,
yeah.
Swapna. Thank you for sharing your story and being so open really to share your life with us here. There's 2 things that I know I'm taking away in a larger perspective from when you're sharing your story. Just how powerful it is to hear directly from a patient, their journey. I think even when we're doing CME programs, we're always worried about like what's the learner actually retaining, and we're going to talk a little bit about the value of storytelling in a minute. But I think that a lot of the folks tuning in today, if they don't remember anything else that we talk about, they're going to remember your story. And I'm just really grateful that you were able to share that openly, and it's just a beautiful example in one way of why it's really important to give that voice in your program, to provide that perspective. But also, just on a personal note, I just think it's amazing the amount of work that you're doing to help other patients and their families to have positive outcomes or be able to deal with things that you've struggled with your entire life is a really great way that you're giving back and advancing the field. Like the work that you're doing is advancing the field of medicine. So thank you for that. We did have some follow-up questions, and one that you really answered well, which was the other part of this, was why you choose to be involved in medical education. And I think you answered that really well. Can you speak to us about what are the consequences of not including the patient voice in programs? We talked about this a little bit, and I really appreciated some of your insight here.
Yeah, so something I didn't say as much, and I'll say more now, is this journey where partly because I had a pediatric onset, and then I had a major surgery and major transformation in my own health, having a transplant in a transition year, 24, pretty young, where I saw this difference between the peds and the adult side. And then I had to seriously take ownership of my health uh, to survive, to survive. And because of that, I've had, and living in Alabama and being 12 hours away from my clinical team, but also seeing that they looking at the whole body. And it's up to me to look at the whole body, brain, heart, and everything else, and quality of life. And as a result, I have found my pit crew, what I call my pit of a multidisciplinary team all across the country between 4 states. And I travel for this healthcare. And I swear by it as to that coordination of care may be one reason of health outcomes that I have, but it's a full-time job. And but having those experts on the team have and has been transformational. And so by not including patients in education, we are missing the day in and day out nuances that patients and families are doing to survive, and then hopefully next to live. And there's a difference between survival and living. And that is really important. And I think it also gives a grounding uh, perspective to the agenda that just cannot be given from a clinician's perspective, though both perspectives are very valuable. Healthcare is a two-way street, and it's made up of humans. And so I think in 2025, 21st century, we're missing the part if we're not including both perspectives in the narrative and storytelling in the agenda. Uh, and if you a personal, if you want to see a personal note, I mean, I'm 35, and we still are talking about inclusivity across the board, and we're not there yet. And it shouldn't take that long. It shouldn't take 35 years.
Yeah, we wholeheartedly agree.
Mhm.
Thank you for that perspective. So I want to transition us, knowing that we have limited time with everyone here, to the how to, really, the how to incorporate. We've kind of talked about the very important value that patient advocates, patient partners add, and also the importance of including them in CME. But we are going to focus a little bit on some real world case examples. So here's our next ARS question. Natalie, do you want to say something about this question?
Yeah, so one of the things we're hoping to achieve today is giving people some resources to alleviate some of the barriers or the challenges that we experience in trying to engage patients to participate in our education, how to find them, how to build working relationships, and how to strengthen your instructional design. So some of these topics we're gonna touch on today that people are mentioning.
Yeah, so interesting. And this is a word cloud. So the words that are larger, I think, are where people are adding more
Mhm.
of these words. So significant barriers that you're facing in including patient partners. Not surprised, but access. People um, great. Yeah, I think access is a big takeaway there. All right, I'm going to hand it over to you, Natalie, for the next few slides.
Cool. So we are going to, as I said, talk about how to alleviate some of those barriers and some strategies for getting around them to effectively engage patients to be part of our education. We opened with Swapna's story for you today, and now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the reasons why we did that, not least of which is because Swapna's awesome. Her story is deeply moving and fascinating and inspiring, and also because across the board, voices of patients that we're trying to serve elevates our instructional design. So our goal as educators is to help clinicians translate this evidence, this academic data into real world practice. We need to bring a human face to it, right? And there's a big gap between those things. And the patient voice in our education is how we can bridge that gap and connect them. The patient voice behind the scenes in the program, helping with development, ensures that the content is relevant to those patients. And then the patient voice within the program itself can be used to enhance the curriculum so that that relevant content is actually retained by the audience. So in medical education, we present a lot of evidence, a lot of facts, because that's what medicine is built on. But because they often come up against pre-existing beliefs, pre-existing knowledge models in the people receiving that information, the facts do not do a great job on their own of changing people's minds, of affecting what they do. But shared stories and shared personal experiences do have that power. And the science behind why they do have that power is that stories invoke different cognitive processes. So many studies have found that storytelling triggers different parts of the brain that are associated with personal experience and that evoke emotional arousal. So then emotional arousal in the brain strengthens memory consolidation, which is how new information gets processed and fit into your existing knowledge models and eventually your long-term memory, which you then use to interpret and impact your behaviors. So there are a lot of ways that we can do this in the instructional design in effective ways. We can present it at the beginning to level set, like Swapna just did for us, creating that important life connecting context that gives the reason for me to tell you all this information that I'm telling you now, the evidence behind including stories in your education. You can use it at the end of the education to reinforce that evidence. You present the evidence first, and then you wrap it up by reinforcing why that evidence is so important and how to use it. And all throughout any type of project that you're doing, you can use patient voice, experiences, stories to reduce cognitive load. And what that does is allows you to capture more of the information and capture it in different ways so that you have multiple representations of the same ideas in your head that you can then put together and more easily apply to your behaviors. So stories, as I said, invoke different cognitive processes. They use different parts of your brain. So if you're switching back and forth between talking about evidence and talking about a personal story, you're switching between the parts of your brain that you're using to absorb that information. And so basically you're doubling down on the ways that you can take in the same ideas and then pack them together. So it's a really strong tool to use, not just to personalize and humanize the science behind medicine, but really figure out what it should be used for. And I want to finish up by creating a parallel here, which is that we emphasize evidence-based medicine in our education. We want our clinicians to use evidence-based medicine. Well, storytelling and patient voices are evidence-based learning. And so by doing these things, we're practicing what we preach as well.
Yeah. If I can add an example here, Natalie.
Yeah.
So we were the Gutsy Perspective team, which is all women. We gave a presentation at the American Society for Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition, which those are the medical terms for IV nutrition and tube feeding, 2 years ago, and we wanted to do arts-based communication to help tell our story in a different way, but help tell the community's story, those living with short bowel syndrome, in a powerful and effective way. So we used the tools in narrative medicine called 6-word stories, originally started by Ernest Hemingway and popularized by Elizabeth Lottie in clinical narrative medicine. And so we asked the community only in 2 weeks' time, please, in 6 words, describe your quality of life living with short bowel syndrome. And people said that was fun, that was easy, and they really enjoyed participating in our social media and our accounts. We have showed the whole collection of everybody's story. And so I'll share the 3 stories from our team. So mine is Seesaw of Control, Disease and Me. My colleagues, who has a 6-year-old daughter born with the disease, Look at Charlie, Not Her Chart. And then my other colleague, who has a 6-year-old boy, who has short bowel syndrome as well, Don't Say What He'll Never Do. Because a lot of times we look at a burden focused narrative versus what can we do. And in that same session, so we opened up with those stories, and then we asked the clinicians in the audience to write 6-word stories uh, based on their perception of what quality of life is for one example patient living with the disease. And so it's a very simple way. What we learned is you can elicit a lot of information from simple questions, which, and Natalie said that really well, of lessening our cognitive load from tell us your case history kind of thing.
I love that example, and I think that it's one that this is the knowledge sharing piece, right? Where even in an online enduring program, even just starting a program with, we're going to start with 6-word stories. Like, here's stories that we got from a couple of patients. Or I think you mentioned that you also had the clinicians do this to get their different perspective. So I think that comes in when you're working with the patient partner and the educational design, you can come up with some really unique ideas to engage your audience. I'm going to do a quick time check for us guys because we did want to get into some more specific examples. So Natalie, if you want to share next, if we go to the next slide, Scott, about how we find patient partners, and we'll work our way through quickly to hear some more examples from Swapna.
Yep. So this part of the talk may start to speak to that challenge of access to patient partners. How do we go about finding them? And I'll say that when I first started doing this, I thought that the only kosher way to go about this was by hooking up with advocacy organizations and finding patients who already had established professional relationships with those groups. But then I learned that medical faculty also have patients of their own who are sometimes interested in sharing their story more broadly and being involved in these kind of initiatives. And personal acquaintances are also a viable avenue to make these connections, as long as everybody is informed about their role and consents to it. And sometimes Google is sufficient, right? If you're looking for a patient advocate, specifically someone who is really involved with their community or network, they already may have their own website, like Swapna does. Swapna, can you think of any other methods of outreach that we didn't mention yet?
Yeah, it's definitely not just advocacy organizations, and really do recognize that they are awesome, and but they can have their own set of capacity limits, and certain patients or advocates they may go to frequently, and so we never want to see the use of token patients. So something we've done in our efforts, I've Googled like rare disease in Alabama and looked at the articles, news features of people, and then contact the journalist, and then they put me in contact with the patient or family advocate. And then what we discussed is it's okay to ask fellow acquaintances, patients and families, for other names. So many times we're all very related and communicate a lot and are seeking each other's support and want to celebrate one another. So however, to do it in a kosher manner, an appropriate manner, I would do it in like a debrief where you've already done an activity with the patient or family. And at the end, you can ask, are you comfortable? Would you be comfortable if at a later point we were to reach out to you to be introduced to other patients, family members that would do something similar to what you have done, but in a different context? And usually I would think the answer is yes. And for me, that's definitely yes. And know pretty much all the GI rare disease advocates and rare disease advocates as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Swapna. I want to say that wrap this slide up by just giving a quick shout out to the ACCME Patient Partner Roadmap. So in addition to the tips that we just mentioned today, this whoever's not familiar with this already, it's a tremendous resource that was published last year and presented actually at Alliance earlier this year, and has a lot of concrete strategies for engaging patients the whole way across the education process, from reaching out to engaging people to figuring out their roles up front, the types of conversations you need to have, the types of logistical things you need to think about, and then building that relationship with those patients that Swapna was talking about, and then also following up and debriefing about the process so you know how it worked and what to do better next time. So I highly recommend this resource to everyone. And now we can move on to the next slide, which is
Natalie, do you mind if we jump in? Because I want to get to the next piece here, but I feel like for this slide, we're going to go into some of this in our own example, but we're just really listing here a couple of ways, a couple of actual formats that you could use for each of these roles that we talked about earlier. Are you okay if we move into the next slide?
Yep, all good.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so this, we wanted to also highlight that many folks are looking to do tethered clinician and patient education at times. And when we talk about tethered education in CME, it's typically education that's being disseminated by the clinicians to their patients, which has a lot of value that I love Swapna to weigh in on. We have a couple of examples of ways that PIK has done this before. We have many patient apps that are disease specific in different therapeutic areas where patients can track their disease, monitor, track medications, and actually use this as a tool for conversation with their clinicians. I think probably the second one is what we're all really familiar with when you create a downloadable educational resource like an infographic, or maybe it's a conversation tool for clinicians and patients to use in practice together. But you can also create entire educational pieces that clinicians can share with their patients. And if you partner with Patients on Dissemination, get a wider net of people that are going to see these. We'd sometimes take animations that are written for clinicians and rewrite them at the patient level. So if the clinician likes what they saw in the CME program, they can say, oh, I'd love to actually share that with my patient, and find one that's at the appropriate level for them. So these are a couple of examples. Swapna, can you comment on, do you think that tethered education is valuable?
Yes, definitely. And something I didn't say when you wise patients consequences of not involving patients, and it links back to this topic as well. So I wanted to explain to the audience that uh, we patients are sometimes scared to, I mean, we're scared to speak up. We are scared to say what's on our mind, if it could even even if it's recommendations or clinical information, to appear like we're challenging anybody. But the truth is, as medicine today, we all have to be our best advocates, regardless. Everyone's a patient. And we are trying to develop a patient facing model right now in intestinal failure. And the number one thing that everyone says from the patient family side is, what are the consequences of the patient educating the clinician? Like, if we learn this and then we go back to our doctor and we tell them what to do, almost. And we see this a lot in rare disease because we become our own expert, and there's so many nuances. One case is only one case, and it's a great question, and because there's a lot of fear. And the traditionally in the hierarchy of medicine, patients are a minority and are lower on the totem pole, and that's just how the culture has been, and it's changing. Um, but we never want patients to be in the middle of communication or a victim in the communication. So by doing activities like this where it's tethered, you are level setting the education between both the clinician and the patient. And what we really like is where clinicians and patients are working together on one tool. And that's what we are working on in the short bowel syndrome space, where because they're both working on one tool, we are making sure it's catered to both of them. And in the clinic appointment, they're both empowered to communicate with the patient, but also that the patient is empowered to speak up in a safe space. And then by delivering information from a CME that's that's tethered, you are creating a safe way to communicate for both sides, especially patients. And then as Poonam said, the access to what you're sharing full 10 times increases if you share it with patient networks that clinicians just don't have access.
I think the word that I want to zone in on that you used was empower and empowering. And I think that's really the value of what we're adding when we're providing these tethered resources. Clinicians are in a position now to empower their patients and bring them into the conversation. Thanks. So we're going to combine the next two questions. They're basically swap, and I'm going to turn it to you to answer these together. But we want to hear from your experience. You've worked with several partners, not just us, on education programs, all that were very different kinds of programs. So can you share with the folks tuning in today a couple of examples of what you think education partners have done well when they work with you, and also maybe where there's room for improvement in those partnerships that you've had?
Yeah. So the first question of what partners done well, and I think it goes back to where I said clinicians and patients and family members are all working together as respected faculty on the same team from idea to dissemination. So I think that also changes the value of some of the tools and content that we put out when you can see that viscerally in the product. So we did a transitions of care program where it was actually a folder and a handheld tool to deliver to clinics, as well as a presentation. And by being part of the program from idea to dissemination with a pediatric GI, a pediatric dietitian, and then my colleague who's a parent of a child, and then myself who has lived through the transition age, we and a design company, we worked ravenously, really. I mean, like timeline was very quick, but to develop a really awesome tool that is now being well respected in the field because there's never been anything. But I think it's really that partnership and from idea to dissemination. And I will say the dissemination part was challenging because they expected, oh, why does the patient and caregiver need to be part of the presentations to clinician organizations? The clinicians will do it, and we challenged them. I challenged them, and we were able to be part of the presentation at least to the staff who is disseminating the tool. And then the other question of where can we grow? And so I think again, like earlier partnerships, we say that really across the board with all agencies from government to clinicians, but starting the conversation with patients and families at the funding, at the idea part, and I think and in the pedagogy and how to deliver the information. I have been part of a CME where the pedagogy was not quite appropriate for the topic because that topic has never been discussed in this field. And it's a very sensitive topic. It's mental health. And so it was such an important milestone, but I think we missed our opportunity to go in depth and really see it transcend the field as a great tool. And then really being clear about what is the role of the patient and family and all faculty, being very clear in that. And sometimes that will take some extra conversations. And I think it's all of our intentions. But again, some of these timelines are very fast. But to make sure everybody's on the same page. And then debriefing. We don't do it enough in clinical medicine. We don't even do it. Let's be real. Follow up, debrief. We don't do it. Let's do it. Let's do debrief. I think that's how we can grow and evolve.
I think that those examples that you gave to me are some of the most valuable pieces of this session. Just your real examples of how folks have engaged you well, but also the room to grow is where I think there's a lot of reflection for all of us to do. I know that it's not because we don't, we all want to do the right thing, and we all want to create education that's super meaningful and closes these big gaps for patients. But once we finish a program, we've moved on to dissemination and we moved on to the next program. And debriefing is such an important part of how we get better. And I appreciated that preparing for this talk actually allowed us to debrief on our last program and something that we're taking away that we want to do better in the future as well. So we're moving into some case examples, and I would like Natalie and Swapna, if you want to talk about the one example that we did together that includes case role play. I think that's a unique way to work with patient advocates, where Swapna was not a speaker in this program, but provided really valuable insight. Can you guys spend a minute giving us some highlights?
Yeah, so perfect. Thank you. So this was a project on short bowel syndrome, which Swapna is a patient experiencing from birth, very uniquely. And the design of this project was, we had a curriculum of 2 podcasts and then followed by a webcast, which included a slide deck. So in the 2 podcasts, there were 2 medical faculty who were discussing the topics. In the webcast, we had a medical faculty presenting some didactic information and integrated that with them demonstrating in a role play scenario how to interact with a patient on those topics that they had just presented in the evidence-based presentation. So Swapna's role in this project was central, by the way. It was just central to the whole project, shaping the key learning messages, reviewing the initial outlines, reviewing the webcast slides, making sure the appropriate content was represented, and sharing key source material was also very helpful, because this was a program where we wanted to provide extra resources for clinicians to engage with their patients, extra tools for them. In addition to the podcast and webcast, she helped us shape the why. Again, the humanizing factor of why this evidence we were sharing was so important and how it was going to impact their patients, clinicians' patients' lives. And then as part of the role play of this program, we involved a patient actor, a standardized patient, and Swapna got in on a phone call with all of us, and we walked through the scenarios and what we wanted to talk about, and gave the actor some really grounding guidance and some tips to make this a really authentic portrayal of a patient experience. And that was a really important role for her, because this was a scenario in which it wasn't ideal for our patient partner, Swapna, to portray an actor. It wasn't comfortable for her to try to pretend to have experienced someone else's journey, because we used a journey for this medical journey for this program that was different than what she experienced. So instead, her involvement was guiding the actor who was portraying that journey. So Swapna, I want to hand it over to you and ask you what you thought about working with us on this project.
Yeah, I mean, I second your thoughts. It went very well. It was perfect for my capacity at the time. They reached out during February Rare Disease Awareness Month, which is a crazy time. And I think I got back to them at the very last minute. And as well as, I really appreciated where in that first call, I spoke very freely of what I thought about the agenda that was already had been developed, or the outline that had already been developed with the clinician partners. And I gave them the publications that either that I co-wrote with our team, and which are, some of them are titled Patient and Family Integration in Short Bowel Syndrome Management. And they went and read everything, as well as the tools that we've already published for empowering patients and clinicians. They looked at everything and then came back with a new outline that incorporated our information very well. So I really appreciate that. And then I was able to, as they said, I was able to be on the call with the patient and really give some nuances of day in and day out, and help her understand actually living with the disease. Because I think a lot of times we look at, there's a disease, there's a problem, and we fix it. And there was not much of narrative of how do you adapt to the situation, to the devices, to the output, while living with the disease, and what questions would need to come up to the clinician at the time. And so, and yes, it was good that the actor was there, because that would break my confidentiality of my own personal journey to go that deep into a clinical interaction, and just feel weird, I think, to do it with a different clinician as well.
Thank you both for sharing that overview. And Swapna, obviously great to hear that you're happy working in this program, but I think that providing that perspective, hopefully others who are listening in can think about what we started with what's the comfort of your patient in the role that they're taking, and how do you talk to them about that? So we're coming to the end of our time. Scott, do we have a minute to take one question?
Yeah, I think so. I was thinking if there's a couple of questions I put in there. I would say if you just want to take one of the first two, and just kind of
Sure.
quickly answer those, that'd be great.
Sure. So I'll present the question to you guys, Natalie and Swapna, and you feel free to add your thoughts. So this is from the audience. Do you always pay your patients for their participation in their education? I'm going to say yes from our side, but the other question is, how do you determine their compensation, or what makes sense? Do either of you guys have thoughts, or Swapna, do you have something to add from your perspective here?
I think that her hotel room connection might have finally faded out. So maybe if Natalie, if you want to address this one.
Yeah. So I can answer that then. I mean,
I'm here.
okay, great. I'll just answer really quickly then that the honorarium that we would pay a patient for interacting with us is, we consider it the same way we consider any faculty participation, any medical writer participation. How much time are they spending with us? Because their expertise that they're bringing is going to be invaluable. So we're estimating their participation and what we're compensating them for it based on the time they're spending with us.
If I can add, and so sorry, I looked at the chat and I pressed the done instead of the X. I'm so sorry. We're all human. Sorry. National Health Council has a fair market value calculator for anyone, industry, clients, companies, patients. And so we use that, and they're asking for feedback right now, actually due on Friday, to improve it. And I think one of the challenges, and I've told them this as well, you're only allowed to select one. You're a patient or you're a professional. And I tell them there's opportunities to be both. And so that is one thing to consider, I think, in anybody deciding an honorarium when including patients.
Thanks, guys. I think, Scott, we're going to have to end there and hand it back to you.
Yeah.
We did have these cases that we're going to have to maybe save for a future session.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to have too much than too little, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So just a couple of slides to wrap us up. So for those folks who do like money, this is not honorary money. This is actually much easier money to earn. We have a CME Palooza scavenger hunt going on. So just go to the website of the promotion sponsor, the Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, and look for the hidden CME Palooza logo. Click on it and see what happens. So the URL is there on your screen. We do have a survey with CME Palooza Spring. If you are on the live tab, please go in and click on it at some point today. It is very short and simple. And finally, our next session will begin here in probably about a minute or two. So if you are watching this live, just look on the link for that next session. We will start shortly. And with that, I would like to thank Poonam and Natalie and Sapana for joining us for this really insightful session this afternoon. And to everyone watching, we will see you soon.
Thank you.